Many countries are now being cautious regarding AI, and while Italy has even temporarily banned ChatGPT. But meanwhile in China, which is famous for banning stuff, some people are lamenting that China has actually hasn't been able to produce a similar tool. In our first episode, our editors and a marketing director talked about how we've been trying to bring AI or not use it so much in the newsroom, and what are the ethical issues that might be arising from using such tools. Today we're going to take a more macro approach to see how the local companies have actually been creating and using AI for a variety of products, and how actually this whole field was actually starting and brewing already a few years ago. So I'm your host, Aladin Faré, and today with us in the studio are Dragos Tsasio.
Dragos Kachio, thank you very much.
I will catch you.
So, name is Dragos. I'm the marketing director at the World of Chinese.
In front of me, Hati Liu.
Hello, I am the former managing editor at the World of Chinese.
And next to you, Sam Davis.
Hello, I am the current managing editor at the World of Chinese.
So, dear listeners and watchers, if you like what you hear and see today, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, hit the bell button to know when the next episode is coming, because we're definitely not done discussing all the issues regarding AI in China in just 20-30 minutes. So everyone uses ChatGPT, we all know that. We've been using it. Some people use it in the office. But what's interesting is that when ChatGPT came out, I feel everyone in many WeChat groups where basically the city talks are happening, that's the public square, it's the various WeChat group in the industry you're in, and people were basically lamenting that, oh, why don't we produce the same stuff? And Baidu, if I'm correct, they also produce, I think they were really scrambling, and they produced, and they basically produced their own variation of ChatGPT, but then that was really bad press because they could not do a live show, and it was basically a recorded video. And so you had people, that's really interesting, even people you can try and buy things on Taobao to get access to ChatGPT. Everyone wants to have access to the real stuff.
What's interesting is that when they actually first showcased Ernie, not only was it just a presentation, but it was also originally done behind closed doors.
Ernie being the name of the
Ernie being the name of the ChatGPT of Baidu, basically. So when they were trying to push Ernie as the strong competitor to ChatGPT, they did it just as a presentation. They didn't have a live version of it. They did it behind closed doors, and that ultimately made the stock price crash. They lost 10% in one day of their stock value just because of that presentation. It was not enough for people. But still, when they launched officially, 30,000 companies signed up on the waiting list.
How do you think the Chinese environment in particular creates a challenge? Because, for example, like you said, you can already get Taobao intermediaries to use tools that you're not really supposed to be using in China. And then secondly, people make so many fake things and do it so quickly. They can just get fake Ernies up, overnight. So how do you think that environment in particular is costing them?
But I'm while most countries are basically building a governance around the use of such platforms, China is doing the same thing. The only difference is that it added an extra article, an extra rule. And that rule is that the AI-generated content should abide by socialist rules.
Wait, that it has to follow the core socialist values?
Yes.
Like the 民主 and the,
Yeah, it's part of the requirement not only for content generated information out there, but it's also for any AI startup that is actually producing stuff, it has to follow these rules, or it has to be embedded in the rule set, I would say. Which right now, the bigger conversation is that it's very hard to do because these AIs are kind of build themselves around the access to the huge amount of information that we have. And it's hard to put a specific ideology in it in the first place. But it's kind of a debate because there's even a problem with ChatGPT based on the language you're using. So that's actually another thing that I read recently where they started doing some tests about the answers the ChatGPT is going to give you based on the language you're using. And again, you have to consider these platforms as being a massive crawler of all the information available online from 2021 and before. I don't know if they updated with the latest version or not, but it's just taking that information and just try to answer based on the expectation almost of that language.
Well, I mean, that is also what we talked about last episode,
Yeah.
right? That these ideologies already built into language that we use.
Yeah.
So, and discourses that are already out there.
Is the language thing not just because if you type in prompts in, like, for example, Chinese, it will then pull the information from all the content on the internet that's been written in Chinese,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is different to the content that's been written in English.
Yeah, which basically ultimately establishes the mindset of the bot in that specific language.
But why is that significant?
Because at the end of the day, it means your bot will never be truly independent or objective.
Well, I thought that was kind of a given. I don't know. Maybe I'm too skeptical.
It's the same way that humans are, right? Yes, we pull information out of stuff we read in this language.
But
So-
just imagine for a second that we start using this bot as other companies started doing. Like, for example, the Blue Focus marketing company that said, hey, we're going to use the bot and get rid of everybody else. Our copywriters, we don't need them anymore. And then they prompt this ChatGPT to create content for them. And what happens is that at the end of the day, they reproduce the same content that we already did before. And it would almost slow the discussion of trying to, think about like how we're approaching stuff in different languages. So it's not like we're trying to grow and be rational and be smart about how we talk about certain things and go like, hey, this is a biased opinion, so let's try to be better. But an option like ChatGPT basically blocks us off from doing that in the first place because we reproduce that same model that we're trying to correct in the first place.
A quick note, because we did mention that quickly, but for the audience. So basically, because some people would be wondering, wait a minute, how does like a Chinese citizen are able to access ChatGPT, especially if it's behind the Great Firewall, and also like you need a bank card from the US to actually be able to use their VIP. But then when I was researching, like just checking on what's the price, it was actually like 20 yuan, which is like $3 or $4. And I thought like, how come this is so cheap? And actually the answer is basic. Like the people who buy the account, the VIP account, then they would do like a multi account. Like it's like Netflix password sharing. And then you pay, and then the one day this account gets shut down, then, well, you just paid like 20 yuan. And so they just hope to sell the same password to maybe 100, 1,000 people. That's the business model of those kind of internet scalper, basically.
Wow.
Yeah, that exists for pretty much everything in China.
Yeah, I'm like, when you have a business opportunity, why not seize it?
Why do you think that the like censorship apparatus or the regulations around these AI language models will stop development of it in China?
It doesn't stop. It slows it down.
Well, yeah, why do you think it slows it down?
Because they basically have to create new roles on those platforms when most of the chat or AI that were developed were using basic knowledge. Like OpenAI was like an open platform where many companies went on there and started building an AI from it. So it won't stop it. Like there's still a massive race towards it, and like, yeah, it's a race, but it will slow it down simply because as we stand, they don't know how to implement these rules.
For the listeners who are unfamiliar, who are the other participants of this race?
So basically, we're talking about Microsoft is doing it, Alibaba is doing it, Baidu is doing it, Kuaishou is doing it, Weibo is doing it. Like most companies out there are doing that race for content generative type of AI. But then on top of it, AI, China already has like a huge advance on AI when it comes to the fact that they've been investing for a long time in AI technology. And for example, driverless cars.
Yeah, because I think at some point it's not just about just the content, and definitely at least one really successful story that we can tell from China is coming from Baidu still. Mm-hmm. So a few days ago, because regarding Baidu, because they can make some product that actually works pretty well, and so it's their driverless car. So that's interesting because a year ago I was invited to go test out their driverless car, but we just did like in the parking lots. So we were in the Baidu headquarters, and they just make us like go around and like one one building, basically, like one block. But then a few days ago, I was invited to go to test their driverless car. I couldn't make it for some reasons. But then this time it was like supposed to be in the streets. Like you could go actually within the traffic. And some Chinese cities have agreed that some fleet of taxi could actually be using those AI-driven car.
Okay, but I think a better idea would be to combine the two. So you have the driverless car AI, then you have the content generated AI who could be one of those Beijing like cab drivers, and then you have both best of both worlds, and then you can chat about. Although that would mean that back to what you were saying about the censorship. Then I don't think they would get as political as the Beijing cabbies.
And they have an opinion about everything.
Sam Hattie, so as managing editor at the World of Chinese magazine, I'm sure you received a lot of pitches from various freelancers who want to write about like Chinese stories and so on. And so over the past years, like, have you seen, I guess, more influx, I guess, of stories related to AI? Like, what have you seen over the years? What did you thought was like a worth story to be published, and the one that you were like, maybe not?
So we actually did an issue in 2021 on...
Show it to the camera.
Is it recording? On AI and you. And kind of the theme of that is because, when we write about technology, or really when we write about anything, we do kind of look at the social impact of it. So we're not writing about the technology in and of itself. It is interesting for its own sake, but we are more interested in sort of the human stories behind it. What does it mean for humans, interaction with machines in our lives? So we did this story about, in this story, one was about facial recognition and privacy. The other one actually is talking about voice recognition and how there are lots of problems with that because it can't recognize sometimes different dialects or non-standard Mandarin spoken by older people or people who are used to speaking in dialect. But a really interesting story that I feel like we should do is this article I recently read about how a lot of the development of data and of AI is being done at the basic level in the interior of China, in sort of rural areas and small towns. And a lot of the people who are training these tools, who are doing the labeling and other low-skilled work required to make them work, are sort of kind of like migrant workers. But instead of working in the factory in the city, they are working in their hometowns or in these rural data centers, young people from small towns.
Because just to give some context, like what is data labeling? That's how we get like all those powerful tools now. It's basically, I guess, every one of us, like if you use some Gmail account, for example, like sometimes they ask you, oh, is this really you? And then they show you like, the picture of like 9 random stuff, and it's like cars and bicycle and the road. And then they ask you, what are the bicycle? And that is data labeling. And this is why now, and also there have been policies, we talked about policies in China, the government has strongly pushed here in China that you have basically data in the east, where are like all the money and the market and so on. But then they would want to have more like data centers and the work in the west. And the idea, and I think it's all ties up with like a poverty alienation, that there was such a huge push already, 2021. The idea is that instead of having all those potential migrant worker going to the east, they actually ask the companies, I would guess through incentive, or I don't really know how, but they do really push all those data center and all those workers to do data labeling to basically go to more remote and poor province. So in Guizhou, for example, where Tencent is building like data center within mountains, because the mountains would cool it down, and that's basically like the way they would try to have more people get a job, and with the hope also to not be too far away from their hometown.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because when we approach our stories, any story, not just about technology, we try to find some fresh angle or something that's not been reported so much, especially in English language media. And I feel like a lot of the media attention on these types of technology, AI, stuff like that in English language media has been on these big companies, but also these particular places like Shenzhen, Shanghai, where all the development's going on. But what we've tried to do with some of our reporting is get outside of those big cities, go to smaller towns, which we love, and see how, for example, digital technologies are impacting rural communities, how they're connected to like government projects to improve farming, to improve the local communities that are in poorer regions. And yeah, so for example, these data centers in Guizhou, this isn't something we've written about, but I think something that's maybe missing from reporting at the moment is how these data centers have impacted the local communities. Like, are they finding jobs there? How are these jobs? Are they any better than kind of the factory jobs that they might have had before or what they were doing before? And how do they feel about having a massive data center in their communities?
Well, to be fair, I think it's harder to. It's unfortunately harder to report some of those stories on the ground when you're reporting for international news outlet when you are based in Seoul or Taipei. But that's a story for another day. Also, like because the work in itself, like because I guess some people could think, oh well, it is definitely better than making iPhones in a factory. But I read another article, and this lady was explaining that at the beginning of doing image labeling, she could do like a few hundreds at the beginning, and then at the end she could do like several thousand per day, and that really seems like a gruesome work.
Yeah, it is very repetitive, kind of assembly line type of work. You're just sitting in front of a computer instead of in a factory. And the article I read actually is from 36KR, if that's how you say it. It calls it like Foxconn. Basically, it's the same thing. Again, these are young people without a lot of education. Maybe they went to vocational school but didn't go to college. And they're doing kind of very basic, repetitive tasks. While the people who, are doing the higher level, the engineering, who are making the decisions and making also the creative decisions, are still based in the East. And China is also trying to also even import foreign experts who can do that, because a lot of the even higher level stuff is being done in other countries. Although I'm sure lots of Chinese people and maybe immigrants who are not recognized have contributed to it as well. So, but if you are looking at it from kind of a class perspective, it is still the same sort of labor relation that the factories had.
I find it very interesting because when most people are already using ChatGPT and all that stuff, and they see the end result of it. But I'm like, there's all this work that is happening behind the scenes, and just think about like the huge amount of people. Like how many people are being employed by Alibaba?
Oh yeah, thank you. So for those that's on the numbers, because I love numbers always. Yeah, just for Alibaba in their ecosystem of labeling AI product, basically they have apparently 200,000 workers in those.
That's just one company doing all that work, and I know the estimate is going to get a lot higher because of the current use we're making of AI. So like there's new jobs created, and like you said, there's actually a lot of Chinese experts that are outside of China that left before COVID because the startup and tech industry got really affected by it. So these AI experts, they just up and went west, and like China right now has like a lack of talent when it comes to AI, and the need is just ever growing in this race. But I do think like some experts are gonna start coming back because China pays very well. I'm like, especially if you're a Chinese expert and you're gonna get employed and be recognized for your work, why would you say no?
Do you have any AI industry topic that you would like to share that you really like?
Well, yeah, because I'm like, we could talk. We mentioned a little bit like the Pony AI that got the license for.
Oh yeah.
For 100 driverless taxis. So I'm like, it's the first big company that actually gets the taxi license to get the cars driving, and that's kind of crazy because I'm like, at the same time, there's no security personnel anymore. So there was actually some driverless cars available in Shenzhen. That was pre-COVID. So there was already like in testing period, but there was a security personnel on board the car.
Someone was behind the wheel in case something goes wrong.
Exactly. So Pony AI got the license to have taxis without security personnel, and they're going to implement it in Beijing, in Nansha, in Guangzhou, and they already have like a fleet of 100 cars ready to roll.
That's just my personal take on that, but I find this AI story, it's kind of the same thing repeating regarding like China, let's say. What's the word? Advantage. Like I feel China is always like the country in itself. I know it's a little bit of generalization, but like it's the same if you look at trains or cars. I feel like Chinese engineer and company are like really good at making like the best efficient product, and we can also see this with all the electric vehicle. And I think the AI, like when we look at the Chinese AI success story, it's about like cars and moving stuff around. And Alibaba is like also like all those robots that are gonna like moving stuff in the warehouse. But then as soon as we start talking about something a little bit more content creative, then suddenly it just can't compare with the US basically, because it's not like I don't think Japan or Europe has been able to create like such a tools like ChatGPT. So I find this really interesting that it's like the same story repeating itself just on a different sector.
You have to appreciate the fact that China is amazing at taking a new technology and putting out on the street if it makes sense. And it doesn't, go against like beliefs, I would say, you're going to see it on the street first. Like while Google is still testing their cars and Tesla is still testing the cars and getting permission to get the cars driving in the US, China is already having the cars available out there and rolling. So that's super interesting. But yeah, when it comes to content, I'm like, tread carefully, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aladdin.
It was great.
Dear listeners, dear audience, look, if you like the show, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, especially the little bell so that you know when the show comes out. Meanwhile in China is brought to you by the World of Chinese magazine. If you want a more human-centered take on China, which go behind the headlines, go to theworldofchinese.com and subscribe to gain our latest article, podcast, and video access. Today's episode was produced by
Dragos, me.
Hosted and edited by me, Aladdin Faré, and distributed by the World of Chinese Podcast Network. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I hope that, yeah.
It's still recording.